And I now am proud to recognize Secretary Rubio for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll try to stay under the 5 minutes, and so we can get time for questions here. So when I took this job, and I said this during my confirmation hearing, the most important thing we need to do is return American foreign policy to be centered on our national interests. For far too long, that had been lost as a concept of foreign policy. In essence, in many cases, oftentimes the U.S. engaged in the world on the basis of what was good for the global order or the international community and what like. And look, for about 30 years, that made a lot of sense until the end of the post-Cold War era. So that made a lot of sense for a long period of time during the Cold War, but then we entered the post-Cold War era. And the war and the world order has rapidly changed. We entered a new era about 12 or 14 years ago, and we entered an era of near-peer competition, where for the first time since the end of the Cold War, the United States had a near-peer competitor and adversary in the state of China. And we need to confront that. And our foreign policy needs to be geared around that and on the realities of this new world. And so what that means is we have to have a State Department that can deliver on a foreign policy that is rooted in the national interest of the United States. To defend the national interest of the United States requires us, number one, to make sure that every dollar we spend and every action we take has to have measurable outcomes that deliver for the American people. They have to either make our country safer, or they have to make our country stronger, or they have to help make our country more prosperous. It has to do at least one of those three things. And ideally, whether it's a program or a measure that we take, it should do all three of them. Now, what that means is that there are some great causes in the world. There really are. There are some great causes. There are some horrifying things that are happening on the planet. America cannot solve every single one of them. What we need to focus on is prioritizing our foreign policy to those areas that are in our national interest. Now, we will still remain the largest contributor of foreign aid and humanitarian assistance on this planet by far. The United States, even under the budget that's before you today, and the changes we have made, will still contribute more in foreign aid than the next 10 countries combined, than the entire OECD. The next closest country is not China, it's Germany, and it's way behind us, even now. But that foreign aid has to be geared towards our national interests. We need to design a State Department that delivers on that. Yes, we canceled a bunch of contracts in USAID. Some were stupid and outrageous, others didn't serve the national interest, and others we kept. And we are folding it under the Department of State. And you know why? Because we want it to be part of the toolbox of foreign policy, not a standalone. It is not charity. Foreign aid is not charity. It is designed to further the national interest of the United States. So we will do humanitarian assistance. We will do food assistance. We will do developmental assistance. And we will do security assistance. But we will do it driven by our embassies and our regional bureaus. Because what those issues mean look very different in Guatemala than they may in Chad or in Kenya or in some other part of the world in the Indo-Pacific. And so one of the things that we have tried to do in our reorganization is drive power and influence on policymaking and decision-making to the regional bureaus and ultimately to our embassies. Our embassies, our ambassadors, are the front line of American foreign policy. The most important thing I do every single day is not read memos, it's read cables. Every night I get 10, 15 select cables from stations around the world, different embassies. The best ideas in that building come from the ground up from our embassies. Now, I want to tell you something else. Look, I did serve in the Senate for a long time, so this is a new job to me. When I got there, I'd get a memo. I still get these memos. I should have brought one today. In order for an idea to reach me, a decision to reach the Secretary of State, some of these things have to be checked off by 40 people, 40 boxes. And if any one of these people has a question, they can hold it up before the idea even ever gets to me. Now, that sounds like a crazy thing to begin with. We can't afford it in the 21st century. We have to be able to move very quickly. And a case in point is what happened last week. Syria, under a new authority, granted people with some checkered background, is on the verge of collapse potentially. And if it collapses, it will devolve into civil war. And civil war will mean that it will become a playground for ISIS and other jihadists, not to mention Iranian influence coming back in. So there's no guarantee that by outreach and working with the transitional authority in Syria, things are going to work out. It may work out, it may not work out. But if we don't reach out and try, it's guaranteed to not work out. And so we had to move very quickly to action that. If we had not done sanctions relief last week, and now the EU has followed suit, then our partners in the region could not have provided donor dollars so that transitional authority could try to stabilize its governance of the country. That place could have collapsed within weeks and become an ISIS playground once again. There is no way that a traditional system could have delivered on that. It would have gone to the interagency. It would have gone to 6 to 9 months of debate. Any individual could have held it up with an information hold, and we never would have acted. We can't afford it. The world moves too quickly. And so we need to drive policy from the ground up, from our embassies and our regional bureaus, and that's what we're doing. And that's what we're doing. On the last point I would make about foreign aid has to be part of our portfolio, part of what we do, and it has to be consistent with our agenda in any region of the world or any country. And oftentimes you will find, and maybe some of you have found when you travel, you go talk to an ambassador and they will tell you what USAID was pushing and what they are pushing in the country are not just different, they're in contradiction. And in many cases, USAID programs were undermining the mission of the embassy. That's a fact, and I heard that over and over again. I've heard it in the Caribbean basin, and I've heard it in other parts of the world. I am not the first Secretary of State that wanted USAID and foreign aid to be under the Department of State. I'm just the first that's been able to do it. And I'm glad we've done it, and it will deliver better foreign policy and, frankly, more accountability and more oversight opportunities for your committee down the road. Thank you.
Senator Cornyn. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm proud of my vote for you to confirm you as Secretary of State. We all know you well, having worked with you for many years. We know of your the qualities that you bring to this job, and I think you're exactly the right person for this job in a very dangerous and turbulent world. When I look at what you and the administration has done just in, it's May the 20th, January the 20th, President Trump was sworn into office, but just a few of the things that have happened during that time, obviously the critical minerals deal in Ukraine, the Pakistani-Indian conflict, which could have resulted in a nuclear conflict between two nuclear-armed countries. Things back closer to where I live, the Mexican water deal that was negotiated with Mexico. I'm frankly amazed at your stamina and what you and the administration have been able to do in a short period of time. And listening to some of the criticism that I've heard this morning, it reminded me of a quote from NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers talking about dealing with criticism, things he wished he had known when he was younger. And he said, never listen to criticism from somebody that you never would have taken advice from in the first place. But let me ask you specifically about two issues. One has to do with Ukraine and peace negotiations. I applaud you and the administration, and particularly President Trump, for initiating these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and try to bring a peace, or at least a ceasefire, between these warring countries. This is enormously dangerous, as you know better than most, because it could easily spill over into the rest of Europe, result in NATO becoming involved and the like. But I wonder what you believe Mr. Putin's motivations are. Do you think that he is engaging in these negotiations in good faith, that he intends to give something in order to get something, or not?
Well, I think that's, on the question of Putin, I think that's still an open question. I think he approaches it, we have to assume, from a cold, calculated cost-benefit, nation-state evaluation of what's in the best interest of his view of Russia. What I'm pretty certain of is this is not the war he thought he was getting. When he first invaded Ukraine, I think he anticipated that the government would collapse and that he would be greeted as a liberator, and it has not turned out that way. And in fact, Russia today controls less territory than they did after the first 2 months of the war. So they've suffered significant losses. They've suffered the losses of at least, by some estimates, 250,000 men in uniform, and the Ukrainians have suffered less, but nonetheless suffered as well. It is a battlefield today in which the front lines move 10 kilometers at a time in one direction or another. Even if they're advancing at a tremendously high cost. But the challenge Russia faces now is their entire economy is built around the war effort. Their entire economy is built around munitions production and, frankly, around the fact that you've deployed about 1 million to 1.5 million people to the front lines, and they're making a lot more money fighting a war than they would in the private sector. So I think that that's potentially a challenge here in terms of bringing this war to an end. What we've tried to do is find any way forward to end this conflict. We think it is costly, it is deadly, it is disruptive, and we want to see it end. We want to see it end because of the destruction to Ukraine. We want to see it end because of the strains it's placing on the budgets of countries, neighboring countries, and the fears that it's stirring up in their regard. We want to see the conflict end in a way that's enduring, meaning not a peace that lasts 3 months and then restarts again, but something that's enduring, that both sides could live with for a long period of time without it restarting again. And that's hard. There's a reason why. This an effort that I wish would have started 2 years ago, but it's starting now. We've done the best we can because we are able to talk to both sides. Obviously, only one side is getting American aid, and only one side is receiving American sanctions. But nonetheless, we think it's important to preserve our ability to talk to both sides. The president is fully aware and has intimated on a number of occasions that he has options available to him in the sanctions field that he could pursue if, in fact, he determines that Putin is not interested in negotiating. But by the same token, I think the president is very committed to ending the dying, ending the bloodshed, ending the destruction, and he wants to preserve, as long as he possibly can, the opportunity to influence both sides towards peace. The minute you do certain things, your influence over one of the two sides to at least lead to peace really diminishes. And then we're back to where we were in January when he went into the White House, which is with no one had a clear path forward. I mean, there had been no... The first time Russians and Ukrainians have actually met directly and spoken was 3 days ago in Turkey. They had not spoken since the Istanbul process in 2022 had failed. So there are 1,000 prisoners that are going to be released from both sides. From a humanitarian standpoint, that's good. What we haven't seen yet is moves towards peace. It's our understanding that the Russians are going to write up terms for what they would require in order to reach a ceasefire that then would allow broader negotiations. We await those terms, and then we'll have a much better understanding about Mr. Putin's calculation once we see what those terms look like.
So to quote you, the jury's still out.
These are complex conflicts, obviously, that are difficult to bring to bear, and there are a lot of other things playing at stake. But I do think that whatever offer Russia puts on the table, if in fact they do, as they said they were going to do, they put an offer on the table and say, if this happens, we agree to a ceasefire and further negotiations. I think that offer will tell us a lot about their intent here in the short term.
Well, I applaud your and President Trump's efforts to try to bring a ceasefire and hopefully a peaceful outcome to this terrible bloodshed, which has devastated both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russian people. Since you wear multiple hats, including as the archivist and Secretary of State, one of those that you wear is the National Security Advisor, and I want to talk a little bit about the Indo-Pacific and the threat that we face from a potential conflict there. I am delighted to hear President Trump repeatedly say he believes in peace through strength. And I think that is exactly right. I think that's exactly the right approach. But I worry that the United States and our allies are not ready for what could be a conflict initiated by President Xi as early as 2027, when he's instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan. General Douglas MacArthur said these words which sort of haunt me in this connection. He said, "The history of failure in war is almost always to be summed up in 2 words, too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparedness, too late in uniting all possible forces for resistance." I don't believe we are ready at this point, but can you share with us your view and the administration's view of what we need to do in order to establish that deterrence that comes from peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, in the most simplistic terms, we have to make the benefit of a Taiwan event for China, we have to make the benefit of it less than the costs. In essence, it has to cost more than what it's worth in order to do something like that, and deterrence is the key to that regard. And I think deterrence obviously begins with Taiwan's own self-defense capabilities. And the harder they are to take militarily, the more time I think they buy for themselves in that regard. I think it continues by having a credible regional deterrent, not just the United States, but Japan and other allied countries around the world, and an increased interest in the Indo-Pacific, by the way, from our European allies. I was at the NATO Foreign Ministers gathering over the last week in Turkey, and multiple member states raised their concerns about the Indo-Pacific and what it would mean for the European continent if there were a conflict there. So I think that also underpins why it's important. We have to understand that any time there's a conflict in the Middle East or a conflict in Europe or what have you, that we have to dedicate resources and time to that. That's time and resources that we're not dedicating to the Indo-Pacific. We would like to be able to do all things everywhere, but the fact of the matter is there are finite resources and there's only 24 hours in every day. And so it would be of great benefit if we were able to conclude the war in Ukraine and with Russia and Ukraine, if we were able to establish some stability and peace in the Middle East, if we were able to deal with these issues, it would allow us to focus more time, energy, and frankly resources on some of the challenges we face in the long term with regard to the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world, but particularly the Indo-Pacific.